Hey everyone, my name is Penny Zanker, and it's time to reset. This podcast goes beyond just navigating change. It's about new ways of thinking about how you can approach challenges, how you can shift your mindset when needed, create some space and grace for yourself so that you can rethink, recharge, and reprioritize when and where needed. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Thank you for hitting play and sharing this next episode with me. It's time to reset. Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zanker and I'm your host. And I'm always excited to pick people's brains and to find out what's going on in different people's minds as to how they work smarter and what that means to them and what that can mean for you. So today I'm super excited to have Jonathan Brill with us. He is a formal global futurist from HP, and he's an expert on resilient growth and innovation under uncertainty. Now, that's something we need to talk about, right, people? He helps Hollywood and corporate leaders envision and profit from more radical change. His new book, Rogue Waves, shares decision-making and innovation tools that helped companies grow through crises and generate over $27 billion in new revenue across a range of different industries. He's in demand as a thought leader, speaker, and contributor to TED, Harvard Business Review, and Psychology Today. And we will definitely have links to his book on the show. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Penny. It's great to be here.
So first, let's talk about futurist. So what does that mean exactly? What's a futurist?
I think there are a number of definitions. I became a futurist when I got my business card at HP, and I thought I was leading their long-term strategy program, and my card said futurist on it. What I do is I help companies think about what is the range of possible futures and what are the small decisions we can make today to increase our optionality and our potential when they happen. I don't know if you noticed this, but things have been getting a little more disruptive recently.
Really? Well,
yeah.
We could say that they've been getting more disruptive or just that they've always been disruptive in different ways. I don't know.
I think both of those things are true. And what we've done is we started planning on shorter and shorter timescales in our businesses. So we assume that the next segment, the next timescale will be the same or similar to the last one. But as these scales get shorter and shorter, the likelihood of them being the same is smaller, right? Think about it like physics, right? Newtonian physics works, at the scale of humans. But once you get smaller, you see a lot more disruption. Things are a lot less stable when you start zooming in. And so that's what we're experiencing, I think, in our planning today. When you take a look at the 20th century, there were 400 major business shocks in the 20th century. Economic shocks,
400
natural disasters in the United States alone.
Wow.
So when you take a look at that, about 27% of the time we were digging out of what they call rogue waves. Right. You see like waves of disruption where you're going to have AI or aging populations or whatever, but the question that we should really be asking is what happens when those waves of disruption collide? Right? How do we respond to that scale of change? Because like I said, we spent over a quarter of the 20th century in those moments. And we spent about 45% of the 20th century bailing out of those moments. So these disruptions aren't actually the edge case, they're the main case. And yet we look at them and say, hey, we'll deal with that problem when we get to it. We'll always be dealing with that problem.
I think that part of our challenge is that we resist our reality. We're digging out because we refuse to see it coming, and we refuse to change until it's forced upon us. And then, even then, many companies are kicking and screaming in the changes that they're making instead of embracing them and looking forward. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I think there are two ways of looking at this. The first is, yes, I generally agree with what you're saying. The second is the challenge with the future is most of us don't have a complete skill set for how to look at it, for how to see it, right? There are many things we can't know. But if you take a look, for instance, at Davos, where the European business leaders met, the World Economic Forum's main conference, on January 22nd, there was not a single agenda item about tensions in Eastern Europe. lots of agenda items about DEI, lots of agenda items about climate, lots of agenda items about human rights, lots of agenda items about automation, but nothing about the largest thing that could possibly happen that year in Europe, which is an upending of the European order and a challenge to the European system. Yet this is how things typically work. That's not an edge case. If you take a look at the days before World War I started on Tuesday. On the Saturday, the equivalent of the National Guard in Europe, that's kind of the reserve forces, the cover of their newspaper in the UK, in Britain, was about their marksmanship and how much better they were at marksmanship than the French. Right? This is typical. And if you just get a little bit better at seeing the future, this is an opportunity for your organization. Because most companies are really challenged at it. And there are processes you can use to take advantage of those moments. And it turns out that the companies that plan for that, the companies that take advantage of it, the companies that think a little more long-term, they tend to have significantly superior economic outcomes over time, maybe not over the quarter, but over time, to the companies that don't.
So how does one get into that new way of thinking? I'm busy digging out, right? And I've got all these fires to fight and, the great resignation. I don't have enough people to even do it. Sure. How does one shift their focus to looking more into the future, considering also all this stress and everything that's going on?
Conveniently, I wrote a book about it conveniently called Rogue Waves. And I wrote it because there are lots of processes, there are lots of techniques, there are lots of tools to do this, but they weren't in one place. They'd be in, like some national defense or intelligence college's curriculum, or they'd be, in the depths of some DevOps project management toolkit or something. They weren't all in one place. And so if you want to learn how to do it, that's honestly, I think the best place.
Still definitely going to go and get a copy. So give us a teaser, like something to have us understand what kinds of tools and things are in the book and something that, we could walk away with and say, sure, I'm a little better today because I can see into the future now.
Yeah. So at the top level, the book has really 3 sections. The first is about awareness, right? If you think about change, any kind of change, no one's going to change unless they know why they have to. And so if you're the captain of a ship, you better make sure that the people in the engine room, know what's going on the sea so that they can innovate along with you so that they're moving along with you. And so we talk about the 10 major trends that will shape this coming decade. No matter what causes the next rogue wave, whatever the seed event is, these other 10 trends will collide to shape it.
Before you go on, let me just ask you something about that first piece with 10 trends to shape this decade. Is that research that you've done, or how did you come up with these 10? Just curious.
Yeah, we did about 3 years of research when I was the global futurist at HP, about $15 million of work, not just on this, but other topics, where we were really trying to figure out how do we set this organization up, a Fortune 50 up for the next decade. And so I've given that to you as the best practices, right? What really we know about the future, because there's plenty we don't.
Right. So you spent about $15 million in 3 years collecting this data. So anybody who's not going out to buy this book, I'm sure it is way cheaper than doing the research yourself or having to put in those years, right? And the time that's spent. So if you haven't done so, click on the show notes and make sure that you get that book, because I'm sure that is gold. I'm in the midst of reading it right now. So just diving in and excited. So what's section 2?
Section 2 is about behavior change, right? It doesn't matter if you know the tsunami's coming, if you don't know how to get off the beach. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how do you do that? And there are really 5 steps, right? And that's, unfortunately, I'm a consultant, so I like acronyms. So we've got the ABCs of resilient growth, and then we've got the rogue method. So there are really 5 steps. One is reality testing, right? How do you actually understand what's happening now? Because if you make any projection into the future off of the wrong baseline, you're going to get a wrong projection into the future. So we talk about what those toolkits are to see the future. We talked about that a little bit earlier, that most people don't have all of them. There are 4. And to get all 4, you need 4 master's degrees, right? To master all 4, you need 4 master's degrees.
Right.
So you need to figure out how to work with them more effectively in your company. The second piece is about observing systems. right? Understanding not just your organization, how does your organization operate, but how does it fit into the larger ecosystem in which you operate? And so we talk about toolkits for doing that. We talk about generating the range of possible futures. So we talked about reality testing, observing systems, generating possible futures. Going into 2020, most of us didn't really understand that you could have a company like Zoom that did 26 times growth, or a company like AMC Theaters that did 96% worse, right? Because all the theaters closed. Right. Both of those are possible futures in any given year. And so how are you going to respond when that level of disruption occurs? The fourth is about uncoupling threats and opportunities. What are the small decisions? What are the small shifts in process that you can make today to increase your optionality and your potential moving forward, while nipping off the possibility of truly destructive things happening to you or to your organization? And then the last is about experimentation. So many companies that I go into, I do innovation assessments. And what I see is that they try and do more and more and more of what they're good at, as opposed to diversifying their innovation so that they're going to have success no matter what future unfolds or which experiments are successful. And so what I really try and do is help organizations think about experiments as a portfolio, like you would a stock market investments, right? Tesla is a great investment, but it would be insane just to have all your money in Tesla. Like, you want to have a diversified portfolio. And the same thing with how you innovate in your organization, so that no matter what succeeds, no matter what fails, you end up with the outcomes you need. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece is about culture change, right? How do you create culture that's capable of having these conversations about a future for which we don't yet have enough data, for things that haven't happened, conversations about things that haven't happened in our careers and in our lifetimes. When you take a look at 10Ks, annual reports, what you see when you look at the risk assessments of senior managers is almost always they're over-focused on things that have happened in their careers, in their industry, as opposed to things that have happened in the world on a repeated basis.
Interesting. So that's awesome. That's an overview of what's in the book and whatnot. So is there a way to pull out one of those types of, I know that it's first you've got to be aware and it depends on where somebody is, but can we pull out and just dig into one strategy? And then I kind of got a futurist question for you.
Okay. So when you're looking, we talked about a little bit about reality testing, right? So the first step in that method. When you're trying to understand what's happening, there's a really simple way to figure out, to get the most information as fast as possible. And it's what I call the REAL method, because once again, I'm a consultant, so I've got lots of acronyms, REAL. Right. So what is your reconnaissance method going to be? So whenever you're looking at a new situation, a new space, the first question is, what question, if you answered it, would shrink the search area, the search universe the most, right? So start there, not necessarily the easiest question, the one that will shrink the search area the most.
So give us an example, because I think, I love what you're saying and it's really getting people to think, but it might also feel a little abstract, right? So, if you give us an example, I think people will be able to connect to that.
Yeah. I'm thinking toward a specific example right now. So this is a simple thing that's just at the top of my head. So I'm throwing an event in Vancouver in a month, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, I've, spent very little time in Vancouver. I've never thrown an event there. Where's the best place to throw an event, right? Or how do I throw a good event? The first question is, how far will people go from their hotels, to the event? So we discovered 2 blocks is probably the maximum. So that shrank my search area for how to throw a good event from all of these possibilities down to these couple of blocks. Within that couple of blocks, the next questions become about, okay, well, what's the food available? What's the experience available? What are the costs of these things? That helps shrink things even farther. My point is that simple idea of what's the one question that will shrink the search area the most? It gives us a lot of flexibility. It helps us focus our time. It helps us focus our effort. In this case, I ended up finding that the Vancouver Lookout, which is this kind of observatory on top of the tallest building, I think, in Vancouver, it's kind of this UFO with 360-degree views. It was available for $300 an hour, which is, in the world of event management, super, super cheap.
Wow. Yeah.
Because they've been closed since COVID and they didn't have any bookings. It's normally a tourist attraction. Right. So my point is, by shrinking things, I was able to find those very specific nuggets that I would have never even considered before if I was looking at the whole city.
I'm a huge fan of the power of questions. I mean, questions are underutilized. And getting to the right question. I've heard it before. Maybe other people have heard this, that it's not about having the right answer. It's about having the right question. And that is going to be so much more powerful in us, like you said, narrowing down our focus and getting clarity on, what is that? Like, I guess your overall thing is what's going to influence people, right? To show up. And like you said, so the distance is one of them. And then you can, ask that question to really narrow it down. So I totally agree. And so people, when you're thinking about your businesses or anything that you do, is coming up with a number of different questions to identify and narrow down your scope and your focus. So what you're saying is it makes it so much easier to go from like 1,000 choices and opportunities to the question that helps you narrow it down based on your goals to just a few.
And I would add to that because it's really easy to get into questionitis as well. Like, I'm a researcher, so I love researching questions. The second thing to ask is, what would change my opinion? Would answering this question change my opinion? Because I spend a lot of time answering questions that don't impact decision making. So when I do a lot of work for senior executives and they want to know more and more and more because they're making a big bet, right? They're making a bet that they can't walk back from.
Sure.
And yet, typically, the logic of these things is pretty basic. That getting more information isn't going to help them make a better decision. There's what you don't know and what you can't know. Right. They're often get confused between the two.
Okay, and there's what you do know. Yeah, I think also what people do is they don't always take a look at where they really are and get clarity on where they really are and what they do know.
Well, there's a really simple tool for exactly that. And this is one of the second things that I do is probably even before I start figuring out what's the search area is like looking at knowns and unknowns, right? Just simply making 4-box model, right? Where you've got like kind of you draw an X and a Y axis and you say, okay, well, what do we know? We know. What do we know? We don't know. What might we know that we're unaware of, right? And what can't we know? And if you want to figure out where your priorities are, that's a really, really simple way to get started on understanding when you're in a really ambiguous place.
What can't we know?
They're kind of one really powerful question to ask, right, is like a counterfactual question, right? We can't know that. So you got me stumped on my own question a little bit. I love that. Let me try and answer it.
Okay.
So one of the powerful questions is to ask what we can't imagine. Another powerful question is like, what's the worst idea we could have, right? These questions, they help us shrink the types of things we haven't imagined yet. And so that answer to what can't we know. So
take your event as an example. And what can't you know around this event that you're planning, just to give people like an understanding of that?
Thanks for your focusology. I can't know what the health guidelines are going to be, the COVID guidelines are going to be on the day of the event, right? I'll know a lot more, probably 2 weeks out than I do now, but we're pretty sure that the regulations will change and I can't know what those will be.
Sure. It could be another variant, right? And then who knows? Variant.
And so that just kind of opens up the range of possibility. It also helps me focus on what's the most important.
So if I'm understanding you, just to help, it's kind of as I work through it in my head, I challenge the audience to see if that's what they understand or whatever. So it's kind of like in that, I talk about in the idea of being a focusologist is to understand what we can control and what we can't control. And so it sounds like there's a little bit of that in there as well. What we can't know is what we can't control. So we can't really worry about that. We need to look at what we do know and what we can, I guess, what do you want to say, suppose or extrapolate on, right? And those are the things that we base our decisions on, other than the things that are outside of our control and we can't know. Am I getting that right?
I think about it a little bit differently because my thesis is slightly different. There's a lot of focus in project management, right? On ignore the things you can't control because you can't control them. My argument is in a world of disruption, do not ignore them because you can't control them. It's far more likely that you'll be disrupted than that you'll be the disruptor. what you want to understand is what that range of disruption is likely to be as a business. Are your finances, are your operations, are your external environment, and is your strategy, are your sales demands, and so on and so forth, able to respond to the range of possible disruptions, the range of possible threat stressors. And when those things happen, are you able to take advantage of them? And you can apply the same thing to your customers, by the way. They have the same challenges, right? What would happen to them? Can you provide value to them? Because if you have a lifeboat and everyone else is still capsized, right? That's a high value moment for your company. There's a high value opportunity to provide value to customers. And so how do you be there in those moments?
Right. Absolutely. We've seen people with factories change what they're producing to take advantage of what's needed right now, right?
Sure.
I think it was Ford or one of the car companies started to produce, masks and other things that were needed, ventilators and things. So that would be an example of pivoting quickly and taking advantage of the opportunity.
When restaurants closed, a lot of alcohol producers started making hand sanitizers.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. Hand sanitizers.
So would you consider that to be that flexibility?
Yeah. What would happen if our current market went to zero tomorrow? I think is a really good stress question. I have a friend who's got a small family farm.
Right.
And they ship to 800 of the top 1,000 restaurants in the world. So one of the questions we asked was exactly that. What would happen if those restaurants didn't exist tomorrow? How would you pivot? And we spent, a number of years looking at the back, kind of as a back of pocket idea, like how would we actually pivot to shipping to consumers? Well, guess what happened in spring of 2020, right?
Right. So they actually went through this exercise before 2020.
Yeah,
Lucky them.
And we didn't know it was going to be COVID, right?
Right.
But we knew that was a really good question to figure out where the stress points would be. They shipped more vegetables by weight in 2020 than they did in 2019. Coming out of COVID, they now have two markets. They've doubled their size as a result of this moment. And this moment that stressed so many of their competitors and has pushed many of them out of business.
Absolutely. Interesting, right? So let's take a quick shift. We're almost out of our time today. I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody else, and I'm just curious what the futurist says. And then I have a futurist question for you.
Great.
So as a futurist, what is your definition of productivity and why?
So historically, it would be what's called labor productivity. So how much is earned per dollar, how much is earned per hour worked. The challenge in times of disruption is that's not really a good metric. The question is how much of your time or how many of your assets will become more valuable when the world changes.
Okay. Cool. So, what I love about that question is nobody answers the same thing anyway, regardless of whether it's in disruption or not. It's one of those things that vary, right? We're human beings. We're not machines. And so those definitions vary greatly. So that's why I think that's interesting. So my futurist question for you is, I've been thinking about this lately because I've been talking to a couple different futurists. So I've been thinking about this and, with AI and robotics, also creating a disruption with the way that our new generations are having new experiences, and that's having them think about education differently. It's having them think about the workplace differently. And it's going to be a very different future of work. And I know I'm putting you on the spot. I'll give you a minute to think about it. I forget, there was a statistic that I saw. I can't remember the number, but that there are, let's say, hundreds of jobs today that nobody could even imagine, like 20, 50 years ago, right? New titles, new things that people are doing. Like it's a job to take videos. It's a job to take videos and travel around the world, and you get paid for that, right? So just saying, things like that. So what do you think, if I gave you a minute to think about it, what's a job or two that you think, based on where you think the world is going, that will exist tomorrow, meaning in 20 years or 30 years or whatever, or 10 years, whatever time frame you want, that doesn't exist today? Or a new industry that'll pop up, or that an industry that exists that will be completely different.
Yeah. So healthcare is going to be completely different in 25 years because of what we're learning about genetic programming and biotech. So you can see a world in 25 years where people are literally customizing your DNA and updating your DNA while you're alive to improve your health. And this is already starting today, but it's pretty geeky stuff. This is going to become a mass market issue, and it's going to be one of the major one of the major industries on the planet.
How do you think we're going to pay for it when, let's say, all this AI and robotics, they take over many of the different, basic jobs? Mm-hmm. Will people continue to, will companies just get fatter and people get poorer, or will other jobs in the workforce appear so that people can pay for this mass market DNA?
That is a huge and complex question.
I know, right? It's so unfair for me to ask you that right here. So I realize that.
The first thing to ask is whether companies are getting fatter in the ways that we suggest. In the 1970s, there was a thing called the financialization of the economy. When we stopped trading on gold and we started printing more money to try and stimulate the economy moving forward. And a lot of that money that we print to stimulate the economy ends up in the stock market. And we don't want that money. We don't want that money to come back into the real economy. Otherwise, the cost of milk, the cost of goods, the inflationary pressures that we're seeing right now, they happen. And so when you take a look at this growth of companies, yeah, sure, their valuation has increased, but it's increased because we want to put that in a place and we don't want it to get into the real economy. That would be my first thing is like, I don't know that that's how you're describing the growth of companies is actually how it works. The second is that there's taxation regimes, right? Like, how do we get that money circulated to provide more government services? We're probably going to see a lot more of that in the next decade, 15 years.
Okay. More government services, you think?
I think that we're going to see a growth in government. Yeah. The last piece you talked about AI and robotics, we're going to see a lot of that, but we're also going to see an aging population. That the population in the United States is getting smaller. It's getting older. I should say older, not smaller. For the first time, I think, in the history of the country. That means that we're going to have less workers. We were already talking about the Great Resignation. That was a lot of people at the end of their work lives, saying, hey, I don't really need to rebuild my dentistry practice at age 64. Like, this is enough.
Really? I thought there were a lot of Gen Zers or millennials and the new generation that are also like, nah.
We'll see. They might not. There's a lot of people at that end of the spectrum who had professional services businesses who
who just said, I'm done, right?
My point about that wasn't about Gen Z or those people. It's that we're going to see a lot of people coming into the workforce, needing to do more work, create more productivity per hour to keep the machines, to keep the machines of industry, of the economy running. And a lot of what robotics, a lot of what AI are going to do is not replace jobs, but increase the efficiency. And by some definitions, right, the productivity of those individuals.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I'm just starting to think about it and question and let my brain roam and read some different things. So I'm excited to dig further into your book. Where's the best place for people to find you? And we'll make sure all your links are on the show notes.
Sure. Follow me on LinkedIn. You can get my book, Rogue Waves. It's on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan Brill, for being here.
Thanks, Penny. It's awesome to be here with you.
And thank you all for being here. I hope we stimulated you just a little bit to think about things differently, ask some new and different questions, and go back and ask your team those questions. I know you're busy and you've got a lot going on, but you see that we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty out there and there's a lot of things that are changing, and it would behoove you. And it's also fun actually to throw it out into, take a lunchtime once a week and just kind of talk about things. Put that little framework up with the 4 quadrants and just, go through some ideas, ask for silly things that could happen in the future and explore, because your team that you're working with has a lot of different perspectives. And just because you think one way about where the future is going and what you know about the marketplace, you'd be surprised at the gems that come out from your team. So, and people support what they create. So, if they have a part in creating something that could be a future option, they'd be much more apt to be a part of it when they were part of the ideation. So that's up to you guys. Bring it back to your teams. Think about it, journal about it, read about it. Make sure that it is a part of your future planning because you want to make sure you have a future. So my name is Penny Zanker, and this is Take Back Time. I'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If you're feeling a little off, distracted, overwhelmed, stuck, or just out of sync, remember that's your signal to reset. And that's all it takes, just recognizing one reset moment at a time. So stay tuned for more tips, tools, tricks, stories, strategies, all here on Time to Reset. We'll see you in the next episode.